Good morning, Boker Tov, on this fine morning, as we had a bit of a cooler morning today here in South Florida. Not cold, but cooler, nice and fresh. So let's use that better weather for studying some Torah. So today's class, the question is, can you give criticism on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok? I don't know if TikTok has a messaging service. I'm not really on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. So, but you would think that what is even the question? I mean, that's just normal life today. That's what you do. You go on, not for everybody, but for many, you go on social media and you critique, you make fun of, you mock, you agree, you disagree, whatever it might be. So, I use this as a sort of platform, or not a platform, as a basis from where to have a broader discussion, which is on Sunday mornings, where we learn a little bit more in depth, not totally in depth because there is limitation of time, but we learn a little bit more in depth some Torah subjects. So today, I want to focus a little bit on the Torah's teaching and view on embarrassing someone else. And today, the reason why I'm focusing on this is two reasons. Reason number one is because it's related to the parsha that we are going to be reading this coming week, as I'll explain in a moment. And reason number two is because it is so common today, it's such a given that you could just say, freedom of speech, which is the bedrock of this country. But that is as much as in terms of the freedom of speech that government should not curtail speech and so on. That is not the same when we're talking about ourselves as individuals. In terms of morality, in terms of ethics, the Torah, which is a book of morality, of course, and a guide, Torah is related to the word guide, of course, tells us that we do not have freedom of speech. We don't have the freedom to say whatever we want. There are laws, very clear Torah mitzvahs, which tells us what we are and we're not allowed to say. For example, Lashon Hara, about speaking negatively or speaking bad about somebody else, is clearly forbidden, prohibited. And we've had a class on this in the past in terms of Lashon Hara, freedom of speech. But today I want to focus a little bit more on the prohibition of embarrassing someone and some of the Talmudic statements and the interesting discussion based on this week's parsha. And that's that. And of course, always welcome your feedback. But let's say a bracha, let's say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah bidvaro. I hope you answered amen. Or if you're drinking your own coffee, I hope you made a blessing and joined in with me. Now, I want to first, as I always like to start with the words of Hashem, with the words of God, which is in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Vayeshev. Vayeshev, Genesis, as we know, many of the portions are so full with drama, with insight, with sort of diverse stories. And this week's Parsha is no different. And one of the stories in this week's Parsha is the following. And that is the famous story of Judah, the fourth of the tribes, and Tamar. Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law, and her husband, died, and Yehuda told her he lost two sons because of her. He said, "Look, I don't want to give you the next child. Let's wait a little bit." Okay, I'm just going to here read the actual verse. He says like this. Okay. Ayoma Yehuda letamar kalaso shvi almona beit avicha yigdal sheila v'ni. Yehuda said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. Maybe," for he said to himself, "maybe he'll die too like his brother." So Tamar went and she stayed in her father's house. Whenever she asked her father-in-law about marrying the next son, Judah sort of pushed her off. Now, the Torah goes on to tell us the following story, and there's a lot of insights that we could discuss on the whole story, but today we're focusing on our subject. Here, the Torah says like this. It says the following. Many days passed, and Judah's wife, Shua's daughter, died. After Judah was consoled, he went up to Timnah. Both he and his Adulamite friend, to supervise his sheep shearers, someone reported to Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep." I have to apologize. I keep on forgetting. I need to put this on to silence so we don't get all the vibration. Okay, so here we're back. Hope you are still with me over here. Okay, now, so she took off her widow's clothes. This is going back to Tamar. She took off her widow's clothes, covered her head with a scarf, and covered her face. She sat down at the crossroads, which is on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. And she desired to have children from Judah, because she was righteous, and she saw in her prophetic vision, prophetic intuition, that she is destined to have children from Judah. So what did she do? She dressed up as a harlot. When Judah saw her, this is going back to the words, the translation of the verse, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot. Because she had covered her face, he turned off to the road. He said, "Get ready, please, let me come to you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. The Torah goes on to tell us that she said to him, "I want you," she said, "What will you give me if you come to me?" Meaning to have intimate relations. He said, "I will send you a young goat from the herd." She says, "Only if you give me some collateral until you send it." "What collateral should I give you?" Yehuda asked. She said, "Your signet ring, your cloak, and the staff in your hand." And then they went ahead, they had intimate relations. And Yehuda did not know who he was having relations with. As far as he knew, it was just sort of satisfying his desire with a harlot. Now, later on, it says like this. Later on, it says like this. Then after 3 months, someone reported to Judah saying, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has acted as a harlot, and look, she is pregnant from harlotry." Judah said, "Take her out and let her be burnt." Yep, okay. She was taken out to be burned. She sent a message to her father-in-law. This is all I'm reading from the verse. Saying, "I am pregnant from the man to whom these belong." She says, "Please identify whose signet ring, cloak, and staff are these." Judah recognized them, and he said, "She's right." And what she says, this is sort of commentary, and what she says, "She became pregnant from me because I did not give her to my son Shelah." And that is the verses, some of the verses in the Torah as it relates to this story. So now, remember this. So let me just sum it up. Basically, Judah went ahead. He had relations with his daughter-in-law, who he thought was a harlot. And at that time, he first, when hearing that she's pregnant, sentenced her to death. And only after she said that the signet ring and the cloak and the walking stick and the staff, this is from who I'm pregnant, only then did Yehuda rescind that decree and acknowledge that it is from him that she is pregnant. Okay. Zaya good, very good, all good. This is the story. Now let's go in a little bit into some thoughts and commentary as it pertains to our conversation. As I say in the introduction over here, we live in a time where people, both news media, individuals, have the ability to comment, to shame, to denigrate, and so on, anybody and everybody. Now, there are laws against. There are laws in this country against false accusations, false rumors, false statements. There are accusations. There are rules for that. I mean, media has a little bit of a broader protection for that. But it has become sort of common that you just post. Let's say you're a baseball fan. Let's say you're a football fan. It is just a given that you could go on whatever feed it might be, whatever social media platform, and you go ahead and you shame the player that you feel did not live up to your expectations, be it a politician, be it an actor. You just do that, and nobody even bats an eye. It's part of normal conversation, and if somebody objects, that's because you're being thin-skinned, etc. Now, so I want to read a little bit, and I want to thank. There's a couple of sources where I prepared today's class, but primarily, some of the sources and thoughts are coming from a Rav Binyamin Zimmerman. I like to give credit where credit is due, because he put together very nicely a sort of an essay on this subject and posted it online. And you're welcome to download it yourself if you want something more extensive. So thank you, Tim. I don't even know him, but that's today's beautiful power of sharing, especially Torah and good things that others can then study and learn and share with then even further, and create more light and more holiness and more goodness. So, the usual source that is quoted from the Torah about being prohibited to embarrass someone is the following verse. In Leviticus, the Torah says, "Hocheach tocheach et amisecha." You should go ahead and you should rebuke your friend, your colleague, your friend, because Torah does not view a society, or does not view us as just being, just looking after ourselves. We have an obligation when we see someone else doing something wrong, says the Torah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Hocheach tocheach et amisecha. You must rebuke your friend. You can't just say it's not my business. Stick to your own stuff, and don't get involved. Stay away. Says the Torah, Hocheach tocheach et amisecha. If we are obligated to go ahead and make the world around us a better place, and care for a fellow, and if a fellow is sinning and doing something wrong, you should rebuke them. But then the Torah in Leviticus adds this line, Velo tisa alav chet, and you should not carry as a result of him any sin. Now, I would conclude, and without researching all the commentaries, I would say that the simple connection between rebuking your friend and do not carry because of him or upon him or due to him chet, sin, on the simplest, most basic level, it means that if you see a fellow sinning and you don't stop them, then you also carry some degree of responsibility for their sin, because it's a form of acceptance. It's a form of encouragement. It's a form of it's a form of responsibility that you have in societal sort of improvement. And if you really care about goodness and holiness, you wouldn't stand by and allow someone else to do something wrong. So velotis alav chet means if you're not rebuking someone else for doing something wrong, you are somewhat a partner, you're complacent, you're a partner, you're part of his sin. So therefore make sure that you object and velotis alav chet. It could also mean give it a slight additional nuance, velotis alav chet, a little bit on a sort of deeper, more sort of loving way. It's not only about your responsibility, your blemish, but it's also lotisa alav chet. You shouldn't be a part in him sinning. Because you love and you care about a fellow human being, you don't want to to be there. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be a part of him sinning. Not only it's about you, it's about him. Lotisa alav chet. Don't allow him to bear any sin. You should be loving. You should be caring. And the best way to express that is by making sure that he or she stays away from sin. So that would be probably the most literal explanation of the connection between rebuking your friend and velotisa alav chet. However, in the Talmud and in commentaries, halacha commentaries, they learn as an actual halacha, as actual practical law, not just as a sort of ethical statement, that velotisa alav chet means the following. That when you rebuke your friend, lotisa alav chet, make sure that it's not done in a way that you will be incurring sin. How so? By embarrassing them publicly. If you see somebody sinning and you publicly rebuke them, you are then incurring sin, because there's no greater sin, as we will learn a little bit further, than embarrassing a fellow human being. So, here, the Talmud is telling us something pretty amazing, that while there's a biblical obligation to go ahead and rebuke someone who is a sinner, so we're not talking about a righteous and upstanding individual, we're talking about someone who's sinning. Nevertheless, if you're going to embarrass them publicly, and I say publicly because there's a different discussion between publicly and privately, but we'll keep it simpler now. If you embarrass them publicly when they are doing something wrong, that is a grave sin, to the extent that under that scenario, you should not rebuke them. You should not correct their behavior. And this tells us how much value the Torah is putting on not embarrassing an individual, that even though he's sinning, and God abhors sin, and sin is so damaging to our soul and so on, embarrassing somebody supersedes and overrides that. Now, I want to add the following. The Talmud goes on to say the following. I'm going to quote from I believe this is from Maimonides, okay, from the Rambam. The Rambam says, this is a translation from the Rambam, from Maimonides, the famous Rambam. He says the following. It is forbidden to embarrass a fellow, especially in public, even though one is not lashed for embarrassing another. Lashed means one of the punishments for certain prohibitions is that you receive, when there's a proper Jewish court, you receive lashes. But embarrassing someone else, you do not receive lashes, which is there's a reason for that. It's not because of the less severity of the sin. There's other technical reasons for that. Our sages said, anyone who publicly mortifies his companion has no portion in the world to come. Therefore, still quoting Maimonides, a person should be careful not to publicly embarrass a fellow, whether of greater or lesser stature. One must not call another by an embarrassing name, nor relate a shameful matter in his presence. So he gives various examples in terms of shaming somebody else. It's interesting that the Rambam, there's an argument, and here we get a little scholarly, so bear with me. That's not complicated, so don't get worried. L'chaim, there is an argument in what we call poskim, in Jewish codifiers, whether if somebody does a sin, and when are you allowed to embarrass them? Now, the Rambam is of the opinion that you are never allowed to embarrass them, I believe, unless they are doing a sin publicly that desecrates God's name. But I'm saying that from memory. I don't have the source in front of me. The Chinuch, another one of the early commentators and great righteous scholars of our Torah and history, says that the mandate of not embarrassing a wrongdoer, a sinner, is only if first you have told him privately and respectfully, but if he continues to refuse your admonition, then not only are you allowed to, you're obligated to embarrass him publicly, as he is so sort of wantingly being a Mechalel Hashem, Shem Shemaim. He's embarrassing God's, desecrating God's name. Now, the Talmud says that one who embarrasses someone. So here, I want to bring, relates out now to our story. To our story, the Talmud, is getting back to the Parsha with Tamar. The Talmud says the following, that the words the Talmud uses is, I have it somewhere here in my sheet, the actual Talmud, but I don't want to, I can't find it right now. The Talmud says, Azoi, one who embarrasses somebody publicly, noach lo, it is easier, it is more proper for him to throw himself into the fiery furnace as then rather to embarrass somebody. Okay? I'm going to interrupt just for a quick second as somebody's here by the door, and I have to tell them that I'm in the middle of giving class. So give me just one moment. Bear with me. I really apologize. But since I have nobody in today, I gotta deal with this. Hold on a second. I'll be right with you. I'm in middle. Hello. Tell them I'm in the middle of giving class. I have to wait. Maya, I'm in the middle of giving class on live on Facebook. So just drop the thing to show them where all the stuff is usually dropped off. If you give me 10 minutes from Maya, I'll be with you. I'm going to be coming back in 4. Okay. He'll show you. Okay. Sorry, somebody is dropping off some donated goods for others. So my apologies. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay. So now the Talmud says the following. Listen to this. The Talmud says, one who is humility. This is from, the Talmud says that from our story, the story of Tamar and Yehuda, where she went ahead and she said to Yehuda, recognize who this stuff is from. The Talmud says that noach lo, it is better for a person to allow themselves to be burnt rather than to embarrass another person. Do you hear that statement? We don't find that by any other mitzvah, almost any other mitzvah. A person, and that's why Tamar, instead of just saying publicly, Yehuda, it is you, she didn't want to embarrass her father-in-law. And if he would have said, I do not recognize who this belongs to, she would have been willing to throw herself into the fiery furnace, which is an amazing statement of how far one must go to go ahead and avoid embarrassing a fellow human being. Now, the Talmud says the reason for that embarrassing someone else is so critical, says the Talmud, that when a person embarrasses someone else, what happens is all of a sudden their face whitens and then they blush. And the Talmud says that this whitening of the face is akin to murder. The blood draining from the face because someone has been embarrassed is akin to murder. And by doing so, you have to avoid that at all costs, and to the extent as we see from Tamar. Now, I want to discuss this and analyze this for a moment, okay? I know that there's a Rabbi Aviner that he said, he brings like this. Reb Shlomo Aviner goes as far as to impute literal significance to the analogy that the Talmud gives about embarrassing somebody, that their face turns white because the blood is drained, and only then do they blush. So he says like this. He says, he cites medical authorities who's of the opinion that the physiological effects of humiliation may indeed shorten one's lifespan. And that's interesting that you have here sort of a medical authority that coincides or is in sync with what the Talmud says, that embarrassing someone is akin to murder, and therefore one should be ready to commit to allow themselves to be killed rather than embarrass someone else. Now, I want to also mention that the Rav Hirsch and others bring that when you embarrass another human being, it's not only a sin and an affront to the other human being that you embarrass, it's an affront to God, because every single human being, as it tells us in Genesis, that every single human being is created in the image of God. And when you embarrass every human being, remember that, every human being, and when you embarrass another person, not only are you embarrassing them, and to the extent that the Talmud equates it to murder, to the extent that some interpret the verse in Genesis all the way to the beginning, Shofech dam ha'adam be'adam, one who sheds the blood of man, be'adam. Now, more usually it's translated is that just murder. A person kills another person. But others translate this as Shofech dam ha'adam be'adam, you shed the blood of a man inside the man. As the Talmud discusses that embarrassing someone causes one to blush. And by doing so, the blood is drained, and that is akin to some level of murder. So over here, they add that it's also an affront to God, because when you embarrass another human being, you're embarrassing the image of God that's within each one of us, no matter what color, what background, our religious belief, our ethnic background. You are embarrassing and you are committing an affront to God, who created only man in his image. I also want to add that, Mark Twain, he brings here Mark Twain, one of Mark Twain's famous quips in Following the Equator, 1897, points out the following: man is the only animal that blushes or needs to. In other words, animals don't blush, man blushes. Talking about the image of God, which we all have. So blushing usually happens under two circumstances. One is when someone embarrasses you, when someone offends you, humiliates you, you will blush. And the Talmud says that is one of the most terrible crimes you could commit to a fellow human being. The other time when a person blushes is that when they're embarrassed on their own. They're embarrassed by a certain behavior, not because someone else embarrassed them. One is a positive blushing, and again, unique to a human being who is created in the image of God. And interestingly enough, one of the explanations of what it means that man was created in the image of God is that only man has freedom of choice. No other part of creation has freedom of choice, freedom to do the right thing. And that is only something that is where a human being mirrors God. And because we have freedom of choice, we can sometimes be embarrassed by our own actions by making the wrong choice. And that's uniquely human, but that has a positive. So let's try to bring this all sort of together. In terms of Jewish law, do you have to literally give your life up to avoid embarrassing another person? Now, this Talmudic statement, Noach lalo adam, lahapil et atzmo letoch kivshen ha'esh, it is better for a person to throw himself in a fiery furnace rather than to embarrass someone else, is something that is mentioned and often repeated. Also, what the Talmud and the Mishnah says in Ethics of the Fathers, that Amalvin es pnei chaveru berabim, a person who embarrasses a fellow human being publicly, ein lo chelek l'olam haba, does not have a portion in the world to come. And as explained, especially by embarrassing someone else, it is also an affront to God. So, as one of the commentaries points out, God does not want you to be in olam haba, in the world to come, in His presence, if you have no respect for that which He has created. So that's all the severity of embarrassing someone else. On the other hand, it seems that as there are other statements in the Talmud, which, while are 100% true because it's part of the oral Torah, on some level, it is not always a statement that is that reaches and is codified in Jewish law in terms of practical halacha, practical law. Meaning, simply said, it seems like from the known and authoritative halachic codifiers, that Jewish law is not of the opinion, because Tosfos, for example, asks a very interesting question. We know there are three sins that the Talmud tells us and learns by way of the standard exegesis approaches of the Talmud. There are three sins that a person must give up their life for. All other mitzvahs, all other commandments, be it positive or negative, a person's life takes precedence. So, for example, Shabbat, you must keep Shabbat. You're not allowed to drive on Shabbat. And there are 39 prohibitions which branch off into thousands of laws of what one is allowed or prohibited of doing Shabbat. However, if your life is in danger, someone's life is in danger, you violate the Shabbat. It's a mitzvah to violate the Shabbat to preserve life. So, to give a simple example, if a person is terribly ill, they must eat something. So on Shabbat, you're not allowed to slaughter a chicken or an animal to make kosher food. But if there's no food and this person's life is in danger, you go ahead and you slaughter the animal, you prepare. I had a scenario here in the community, a modern scenario. A certain device which is prohibited on Shabbat needed to be activated in order to save a life. And the answer was clear cut. Of course, a mitzvah to do so. So almost every single mitzvah is pushed aside in order to save a life. However, there are three exceptions. One is idolatry. Idolatry does not take precedence to life. If you are forced, which has happened over history, unfortunately, to commit idolatry, whatever the definitions of idolatry is, versus preserving your life, you are forbidden to preserve your life. You're forbidden and worship idols. Number two is forbidden relations, Gilui Arayot. If somebody tells you, I will kill you unless you have an affair with so-and-so, with a married woman, or you are sick to death and the only remedy is because you have this terrible crush on a married woman, and the only remedy is to acquiesce to your temptation, you are forbidden to acquiesce to your temptation, no matter if that puts your life in danger. And number three is murder. If someone says to you, kill X, if not, I'll kill you, you are forbidden to kill X in order to save your life. Those are the three, what's called the cardinal averot, sins that one is obligated to give up their life. They are not allowed to save themselves to prevent them from doing these sins and go ahead to doing these sins. Tosfos is one of the most famous commentaries in the Talmud, and Tosfos says if embarrassing a fellow human being is one of those three sins that one must give up their life, as the Talmud is telling us from the story of Tamar, that she was willing and ready to give up her life. And we learn from that that's a behavior that we should adopt. Why doesn't the Talmud say there are four things? One is to prevent embarrassing someone else, which is akin to murder, right? So therefore, Tosfos actually concludes and says the reason that it's true that one has to give up their life is not to embarrass someone else. However, there's a reason that the Talmud doesn't bring this as one of the three, because it's not something that's mentioned explicitly in the Torah. Okay. However, it seems like from the classical codifiers of halacha that this mandate of the Talmud is not an actual halacha, meaning that you do not have to give up your life to prevent and avoid embarrassing another human being. It is like there are many statements in the Talmud to highlight the importance of something, but is not to be taken in the most literal sense. And this seems to be the consensus of most of the codifiers, which halachic authorities, that although we learn from this how one must be terribly careful of not to embarrass someone else under all circumstances, unless where there are certain guidance, certain Torah guidance when one might do so. We learn from this how one has to go to the furthest degree to avoid embarrassing somebody in private and especially in public. So in conclusion, getting back to our question, can you therefore embarrass someone on social media? The answer would be what? Give us your answer. It's not complicated. There is no place and nowhere does it say that you are free to embarrass somebody on social media, to post something derogatory, to post something embarrassing, where especially that it's public and others see, no matter who the personality is, someone you like, someone you don't like, someone you agree with, someone you don't, you're allowed to disagree with them, obviously, you're allowed to give them your opinion, but to embarrass somebody is unequivocally wrong, forbidden, an affront to God. You don't have a part in the world to come, etc., etc. So that, I hope that discussion is clear. Let us increase love. Let us increase closeness and peace amongst human beings. This is not to mean that you can't critique. This is not to mean that you, even though that's the title of the class, this does not mean you can't criticize in a respectful way. To use the words of my holy Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, that you could have chilukei deyot, you could have differences of heart, but you should not, differences of opinion, but you should not have differences of heart, unless somebody's threatening to kill you. And even though that's the story of Yehuda and Tamar, but as I said, the halacha is that if somebody's there and threatening you harm, that's a different story. And that's maybe another nuanced discussion over here, but we get the idea. You get the idea. So let's finish it off here. Hanukkah is coming, and we have lots of things going on for Hanukkah. Look at our websites, look at our Facebook and other social media for all the wonderful things that are going on Hanukkah. Of course, we have plenty of menorahs. If you know someone who doesn't need a menorah, who needs a menorah, doesn't have a menorah, please let them come get a menorah, no charge. Next Sunday evening, we have a wonderful Hanukkah event at the Sportsplex. See postings for all the details. Thank you for listening. Let's spread kindness. Let's spread goodness. Let's reduce and eradicate hate and denigrating others. Let's respect them for who they are, created in the image of God. Everybody have a fantastic week. Thank you for listening.